Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our April meeting. Tonight, first of all, I want to welcome everybody to the California Society for Psychical Study. We have a few guests, and to tell you that we meet once a month from September through June. We'll publish a monthly newsletter and trying to get the word out. So we have good lectures. Next month, actually, we're doing something a little different. We're going to have a video night, and we're going to show clips of all sorts of things that typically have not aired on television anywhere here in the States. Ruth, you're going to bring some Luis Gasparetto. And I've got some unusual video pieces that have definitely not aired anywhere.
Want to borrow my morgue piece?
Yeah, oh yeah, actually.
That's a good one.
We'll have a Russian psychic in the morgue, raising the dead. Now, if that's not a reason to come back next month, I don't know what is.
I have a couple of people dying right now.
Tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce Ed May. Edwin May is someone I met a number of years ago, actually at Parapsychological Association conventions in the early 80s. And I was fortunate enough, while I was on faculty at JFK in the early 80s, to be invited out to SRI. Back when the only computers people were having at SRI were Lisas at that point. So, the old Mac precursors. And just have had a great time anytime Ed has spoken at a professional conference, which I can say is unusual. To go to a scientific convention and actually enjoy someone speaking is a rarity, and I can say that Ed May is one of those few speakers that really does that. Tonight, Ed has got a wonderful topic, I think, which really is a great discovery around psi abilities. And so, without further ado, the former head of Project Stargate, scientific liaison, what's your actual title there?
Research.
The big man.
Research director.
Research director of Project Stargate, which was a remote viewing project for the government. Ladies and gentlemen, Edwin C. May.
Oh, well, is the auto working now? Very good. Thanks, Lloyd, I think. With such a small and intimate group, I don't want this to be formal, and with due apologies to some of you, you will have seen a lot of what I'm showing again tonight. But feel free to ask questions as we go along. We have a lot of time, and I'd like it to be more relaxed. So, there's the first view graph. I hope you can, let me switch this over. So the title of this is called Psi and the Stars, with a double entendre on the word star. Star of the kind that you walk outside even on a blustery night and see them in the evening, and a star in terms of someone who's really excellent at doing ESP, if you will. Okay? So I'm going to try to show you a little bit about that. And going to change the terminology, mainly to confuse everybody. When we were doing this back for the feds a long time ago, we didn't want to use the word ESP, because ESP has a lot of emotional baggage with it, and they wouldn't give us any money, to be blunt about it. So we had to come up with some other name. For years at SRI, it was called remote viewing. And that sort of implies that you're out there remotely looking at stuff. And we didn't like that very much, because we don't know whether you're looking at stuff or experiencing stuff or hearing stuff, so why should we call it remote viewing? A better term would be remote sensing, but NASA has cornered the market on that because it means something different to those folks. So we decided to use the word anomalous mental phenomena, and if you if you have copies of the Journal of Scientific Exploration, you will notice that there's blood all over one of the more recent journals, because Stephen Browdy takes me to task because I'm changing the phenomenon of the field, I mean the terminology of the field, but I'm not actually doing that. In fact, the papers I wrote say, this is how you should learn to read our papers, and if no one else wants to adopt this terminology, that's perfectly fine. But Steve, who's a good friend of mine, really took me to task. The earliest version of that paper ended up with, and I'm not kidding you, quote, Stephen says, May is either cravenly dishonest at worst or seriously misguided at best. And I called up Stephen and I said, why is the personal attack? We're good friends. He says, gee, that's not a personal attack. You should go to some of our philosophy meetings. And I said, no thanks. I'm not going to any of your meetings if that's kind. Anyway, so the terminology is kind of a big thing. And the field at large is trying to figure out what should we call this stuff. You know, anomalous has kind of negative connotations to people. But if you really work in science, anomalies is where the fun is. That's where the things that don't fit. And that's where you should go and look. So we use the term anomalous mental phenomena in sort of for what generally people call SAIC. But for ESP or telepathy or remote viewing, we've coined the term anomalous cognition. Because cognition means to become aware of stuff. And that's what happens in these kinds of experiments. And we haven't a clue yet, although there's some teasing things that are leading us now. But generally, we don't know how it is people become aware of their experiences, which we call ESP or remote viewing. So to make that a very neutral term, we've called it anomalous cognition. And just to be complete, here's PK, but I'm not going to talk at all about that. Okay, so I'll go through this rapidly because clearly you folks are really up to speed on this. But if you're going to claim there's an anomalous flow of information, then we need a target or some information, which includes outdoor scenes, photographs, physical objects, geometric shapes, and symbols. And someone has to respond to that, ostensibly psychically. And so somebody writes and draws the important material, and occasionally we audio and videotape stuff in the laboratory. Now, I'm not speaking only of laboratory experiments. And here is the biggest feature of all. How do you know something happened when you were done? And there are critics of the field say, oh, this stuff is so subjective, and how could you possibly do this? And, you know, maybe your work isn't double-blind and all of those technical details. But we're going to spend a little bit on this first one called rank order and ignore fuzzy sets, which I'd like to try to ignore fuzzy sets, but they seem to work. Okay. So how would you do one of these experiments? It takes 4 people to conduct a single trial in one of these experiments. It's very labor intensive to do it right. Number one, let's suppose at 10 o'clock here in the evening, because it's almost that now, a receiver, our word for subject, our word for remote viewer, our word for participant, our word for Lloyd Auerbach, and a monitor, someone who's going to interview Lloyd, me, okay? And we're locked away in a laboratory, this room. Next. An assistant, Diane Jeanette, leaves the room, goes up to the 3rd floor of this building, if there is one, if not, on the roof, and uses a random number generator to select one picture out of a predefined set of, let's say, 100. Actually, in our experiments, we use 300 now. But at that given moment, this picture has been chosen, and neither Lloyd, the receiver, nor I, the monitor, although we may be familiar with all 100 of those, we don't know which one was chosen. So I've got 99 ways of misleading our dear friend about telling me what's in his mind with regard to that photograph, and only one way to lead him properly. So it's a really nice way to keep from fooling ourselves as to what's going on. And it's a random selection because Diane knows Lloyd really well and knows that he's an aardvark freak. He breeds aardvarks on the weekend.
Anteaters.
And he breeds those too. And so Diane would think, well, Lloyd loves anteaters. I think what I'll go and I'll pick the anteater target because I know that's what he likes. And Lloyd thinks, Diane knows that I like anteaters, so she's going to choose the anteater. No, you can't do that. So to avoid second guessing each other, that's why this is random. And you all know that perfectly well. Okay, so for 15 minutes, I interviewed Lloyd by all kinds of very interesting techniques, which are best found in San Francisco. But we have some really neat ways of eliciting information from Lloyd about what's in his mind with regard to that photograph that's been randomly selected. And as I said, I can't mislead him. And the interesting thing is, the techniques that do not work are promising him large sums of money, M&Ms maybe, but we don't know much about the motivation to get Lloyd to do this. So at the end of the 15 minutes, we collect all the data, and in the real world, there's a whole lot of security to keep from fooling ourselves and ways to prevent fraud and so on that go in here. And then we call up Diane and say, bring us the answer. We want to show Lloyd what the picture actually looks like. Well, I told you, I said it takes 4 people, and I've only listed 3. Diane, Lloyd, and me. Who's the 4th? My dear colleague Judy is the 4th. She gets stuck with the hard work. She's the analyst. Okay, here's a real case of a recent experiment we did 2 years ago, funded by the Biol Foundation in Portugal. And this is all the data that was produced by Mr. Joe McMoneagle. In fact, all the examples I've chosen for tonight are by one of the stars, which was the title of this, Joseph McMoneagle. I don't want to mislead you into thinking he's the only hot shot. He would be the first to tell you we've got 5 others that are equally as good. But this is very typical of a remote viewing or anomalous cognition session. I certainly couldn't look at this and tell you what the answer was. He says there's a flat side, vivid white, perspective, flat area, high ground, low ground, meets with structure, solid bank of dark color, something that looks like, he says big trees here, background has some squares in it. All right, so that's the data, typical data that you have to work with. That's really crummy data. I don't think the baby bells are going to have to worry very much that remote viewing or anomalous cognition is going to replace those ways of communicating with each other, that is the telephone, as opposed to this technique. It's not very good, rich in information. Occasionally, and you'll see some examples, it is pretty good. But this is really quite typical. Okay, so how would you actually analyze this? Well, I told you it was, Diane chose the thing from the picture from 1 of 100. Well, it's actually a little more complicated than that. These 100 pictures are set up in 20 predefined packets of 5 photographs each. You're going to see one of those packets in a minute. And each of these targets, these pictures in a given packet, are as much different from one another as we could possibly make them. And in fact, on the targets that we're talking about here, there were 30 person-years worth of effort that went into making this particular set of targets that were used in this experiment, which is an extraordinary amount of effort involving environmental psychological issues and fuzzy sets and a whole lot of technical details to make these things as much different as you can possibly make them. Well, since most of them are outdoor scenes, you can't do a great job at it, but if you put some effort in it, you can, it's not too bad. So Diane would actually first pick a number between 1 to choose between 1 and 20 to choose the target. And then she would choose a number between 1 and 5 to choose the target within that pack, rather. All right? So there are 1 right answer and 4 non-answers. And you'll see that in a minute. Now, poor Judy has the worst task at all as the analyst, who's usually on a different part of the country. And in fact, I actually play that role most often. So I can complain bitterly about what a pain it is. So my job, or Judy's job as the analyst, is to determine which of these 5 targets best matches that response you just saw. You may come to the conclusion, none of them do. It's a piano and somebody drew a tree. That doesn't match at all. Or maybe Lloyd's being cantankerous, he hands in a blank piece of paper. You still got to do this job, in which case it's easy, you just guess. So how does that work when you try it? So here's the poor analyst, and here's the response. And here's the original order of the targets. Remember, there are 5 of them. The order is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Judy determines, she says, you know, this one, labeled number 1, that's target 4, is the one that best matches. It's a crummy match, but out of the 5 pictures, it's the best one. Well, having done that, she's not finished. She has to say, of the remaining targets, 1, 2, 3, and 5, which is the second best match? In this case, she chooses target number 3, and so on. This is called rank order. So then we go and find out what the actual answer is, and it turns out that this target was the target number 3 was the correct answer, so it was a second place match. Wasn't perfect, but it was labeled in second place in this fictitious example. Now, you guys get to do this. There's to remind you what the picture looked like. It's pretty small, and I apologize. Remember, there are trees and a flat white side and a flat area and so on.
There's a tall object.
Tall object.
Yeah, that word.
This thing here.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So here's one of the pictures. There's another one. Third one. Fourth one. Fifth one. Okay, not a lot of fun, is it? Why don't we go home and hit the... All right. Who votes for this as the best match for that? Who votes for this is water here in the mountains. Who votes that? Oh, come on, you guys are too easy. How about the seacoast? Hands? Gee. How about the road? You've all seen this before. That's the trouble. That's the right answer.
It looks like it's just reversed.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is typical of Joe. 50% of what he does is a first place match where you'd expect only 20% by chance. Of those, about 15, and I get killed on the internet for this, about 15 to 20% of his output is of the kind I'm about to show you. But this is more typical, okay? So that's, you've done a rank order judging and that's how it happens. Okay, switching the protocol a little bit, we could do the same sort of thing, except instead of choosing one picture of out of a group of photographs, we actually choose a real location out of a large collection of them. And whereas the first protocol I told you did not use a sender in a telepathic mode, this one does. In other words, in this case, Diane would go as an outbound sender. She would go to a random number generator, pick a location out of a bunch that were predefined, and says, oh, drive to San Francisco, go to Palo Alto, and go someplace and stand there for a half an hour. Meanwhile, we go have a beer. And when we're all done at exactly the right appointed time, I say to Lloyd, tell me what's in your mind with regard to what Diane is now experiencing. Got it? Otherwise, it's exactly the same thing, the same rank order kind of judging, blah, blah, blah. So this represents, and it is a common, with one example in tonight's work, I will show you all of the data on all trials. So I'm not selected out just the good stuff and hidden the bad stuff, all right? And in every case except those that I'll point out, which are few, I've not chosen photographs that flatter the data for that target. They were predefined, okay? So here, this is an Oriental style building with lots of poles in it, very open. I don't know if you can read that. It says, note, something like a fence, but it's not a fence. Rows of vertical lines up and down with a few horizontals. It says, like looking at something that, that as it, can't read it on the screen, looking at something that narrows as it goes away from you. Perspective. Quiet, solitude, set aside, flat, water, natural at the site, kind of round objects, standalone structure. And while Joe was drawing that, Martha Thompson was standing there. And again, this was not photographed to flatter this data. This is the Baylands Nature Preserve, and this is a fence, but it's not a fence. It's to keep you from getting in the marsh. And as you turn around here, you find yourself 25 meters from San Francisco Bay. And if you turn around, right behind you is a tall electric power transmission tower. Not bad. In the same series, Joe drew this. He said, single structure, dark browns, next to the edge of water, boats, large parking area. And this little stuff over here, one of the big mysteries, one of the big science questions we have is, how do we know we got something good before we know the answer? And the answer is we don't. And the worst person to ask is the viewer. Except this time Joe got it right. What we did was ask him to draw what he thought, how well he had done. And he said he had high probability that he did very well. And in this case, he did. But it's very frustrating, and the Fed spent large sums of money, I'm talking millions of dollars, to try to solve this problem, and we failed at it. We have no a priori indicators, physiological, behavioral, psychological, you name it, no advanced indicators, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. With one modest exception, with one person, we did some technical audio analysis with a fellow from SRI who in fact analyzed Nixon's famous or infamous 18-minute gap. This guy's an audio expert, and we found some audio tonal qualities in the voice of one person, Hella Hamid, that was a predictor of how well she was going to do. Okay, so while Joe was drawing that, Martha Thompson was standing there. Again, this was not photographed. He says parking says somewhere parking, yeah, there it is, parking lot. And these pictures were defined as part of the target structure. Okay, one more example like this. This is a fun one. You familiar with lucid dreaming? You guys know what lucid dreaming is? Yeah. Great, that's nice. I was going to spend 10 minutes talking about lucid dreaming. We're going to be done real early here. There's a lot more that I could go through here. But we wanted to try to answer a major question. Look, the reason the feds gave us money for all this for all these many years was A, to find out how the stuff works, and B, could we make it a heck of a lot better than it apparently was. So we were really willing to try anything to make this stuff better. And so from the early Maimonides dream work, we thought, well, people could become psychic, if you will, in their dreams. Well, thanks to Stephen LaBerge and sort of directed dreaming and lucid dreaming, maybe we should go back and revisit the dreaming stuff. Although, frankly, it's a giant pain because you only get one trial a night and somebody has to stay up all night. Fortunately, it's not the dreamer. But, so we take old Joe and he's great. He's a wonderful, very close friend of ours now, and we've been working together for 17 years, and so that gives us a free license to abuse the hell out of the poor guy. So, okay, come to the dream lab at Stanford. We're going to wire all these probes all over your body. You're going to get into this bed, go to sleep, and relax while we watch. Okay, so, and what's amazing about LaBerge's work is, and when I first started to learn about this from Stephen, you know, he'll do experiments where he'll say to the lucid dreamer, when you become lucid, move your eyes to the right twice and to the left twice, back and forth, and that'll show up in the EOG record. And so signal us you become lucid. Okay, then I want you to count out 10 seconds, 1 a second on your clock, your dream watch. And when you're done with that, we want you to go to the library and see if you can go through the alarms without setting them off, and then find a person of either gender that you are sexually attracted to walking along the Stanford campus and have sex with them, and a whole long list of stuff. And I said, wait a minute. You could tell me that now in my waking state, and ask me 5 minutes from now to do all that, and there's no way. I cannot remember that. How do you expect some poor person who's going to be asleep to know about how to do all this stuff? Well, apparently it works. So we told Joe, if you have a lucid dream, signal us. Then what we want you to do is get out of your dream bed, out of the dream laboratory, down the dream corridor, into the other dream laboratory, and on the wall in that dream laboratory you will find a dream envelope. Open the dream envelope, pull out the picture, study it, stuff it back, close the door, backtrack back into the dream bed, move your eyes and tell us you've done that, and we'll wake you up and we'll ask you what it is you dreamed about. So, this is what he drew. And he said, Key Mountain, January 15th, 1992 is when we did this. He's got a cabin here, a path, a barn or large cabin. It's got shadow here, Key Mountain, American Rockies, or the Alps. And then he started complaining. I mean, we get to abuse him, but we also have to get abuse ourselves. And he says, come on, you guys. It was a lucid dream. I did everything you wanted me to do. I go in there, and I can't find a stupid envelope. What did you do? I turned the lab upside down. I can't find the envelope. But then he said, I remembered this is a lucid dream. Aha. So, what I will do, says McMonigal, is I will go and stand where the photographer stood who took the picture that's in the envelope I can't find. Why not? It's a dream. It's easy to get through customs. Well, the picture that was in the envelope that he couldn't find was that. Now, when I saw this in the feedback, I said, Joe, you're really slipping. You know, there's a car here. And let's get it right next time.
Behind the barn.
Behind the barn, yeah. And he missed another barn here. But I have to tell you, and with all due modesty, with my sketching ability, I could look at this photograph with my eyes and not do as good a job. Now, how often do we see this? First of all, well, let me get to the next slide and you'll see. This is the decoy set to show you that it really was quite different. Okay, let me just show these, just to keep my scientific integrity intact. The examples that I've shown you were the Outbound series. There were 12 of them, and these are the numbers to show it was really good stuff. And here we have lucid dreaming experiment. We did 21 trials, and it's not quite as good stuff. And so lucid dreaming appeared not to be an asset. Very disappointing. Over the long haul, it didn't work as well as just sitting at a table, and sitting at a table is cheaper, faster, and more interesting. Now, LaBerge predicted that, actually. And he said, look, in lucid dreaming, expert even lucid dreamers tend to take into their dream experience their daily life experience. An example. Well, here I am lucid dreaming. You know, I've always wanted to go to Paris. So what am I going to do in my lucid dream? Well, I've got to call up my travel agent, get through the endless voicemail buttons, book a flight, get in my car, drive to the dream airport, get on the dream flight, and wait 8 hours in that stupid flight to Paris, and I'm finally there. Huh? Well, more experienced dreamers say, oh, well, wait a minute, I can fly. Right out through the window, flapping your arms, and there all of a sudden you're in Paris 5 or 6 hours later, but you're exhausted. Really expert dreamers can say, click, here I am, I'm in Paris. But the majority of people bring with them the very things into their dream experience which would screw up remote viewing in their waking experience, and that turns out to be true. Okay. Now, this is one of actually 3 examples. I'm going to show you 2 of 3 examples here, but actually only show you one of those 2 examples that were formally classified. We were asked to know how well could you use anomalous cognition or remote viewing to detect, which later after the fact we found out, what the military kindly calls directed energy weapon systems. Because we'd like to know if the Chinese or the Hungarians or the people from Brooklyn are developing these kinds of things to, you know, as a threat or not. So, how did we do that? Well, we had 2 trials. We actually had 3, but the slide's only just 2. 2 trials 1 year apart. Here's what the protocol. Receiver 372, and that's Joe. We had a photograph of a target person. None of us had met. The client sent us a little photograph. It was Xerox of his driver's license, if I recall. And none of us knew him. And we asked Joe, flew him out here to California, and we said, okay, at midnight, 8 a.m., 4 p.m., and the following midnight, please describe where this person, whom you've never met, is. That was the tasking. We used this fuzzy set stuff, which I promised I wouldn't talk to you about, but there are 2 concepts that come out of it which are fairly easy. If by some magic you could define in quantitative terms what the target was, like if this room was the target, you'd say, well, definition of this target, it's got a table, it's got people, it's got chairs, it's got a laptop, it has a piano, it's got, you know, however you describe this, you could make a long list of stuff. So the accuracy in this kind of analysis is, out of all the stuff you've predefined about the target, what percentage of that was correctly gotten by the session? So if it's really great, you get 100% of it. You got it all right. If it's really bad, you got none of it. The problem is, if you're thinking about it, if I were to, or Lloyd, since he's the viewer here tonight, if Lloyd read the Encyclopedia Britannica as his response to this room, he would eventually mention everything in this room. So he'd get 100% accuracy with no other ability than reading. That's not particularly useful if you're studying ESP. So we have another term called reliability. And that is, out of all the stuff he said, what percentage of what he said is correct? In the case of reading the Encyclopedia Britannica, the reliability would be close to 0. So we use as a measure, actually we multiply these 2 together, you have to describe a sizable fraction of the target correctly in a parsimonious way. But we'll just stop here with accuracy and reliability because they're rather astounding. The first target, and you'll see some examples of this, was a 50 million electron volt electron accelerator at Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, site A300 out here in Livermore. And with this kind of measure, defined by the military client, 77% of what they thought was important about this site, Joe described correctly. And about 78% of what he said was in fact correct. Not everything. And I thought, boy, that's a fluke, but whew, they gave us more money. We did it a year later, which I won't show you these pictures, with a microwave generator, and essentially the same results, statistically the same results, a year later. A third year, we did it against an underground nuclear, and we didn't do a formal analysis, but we were told by the client it's about the same level of quality. Okay. At one of the 8 a.m. session, this is, well, I promised to tell you when I'm showing you partial data. Here it is. There were lots of pages, but this is one set of stuff that he drew. And he's got building A labeled as a T-shaped building with a little thing on top. He's labeled it building A. A lab complex, he calls it, a city. Mountains, can't read it terribly well from this angle. And he's got a road here, trees, parking lot, and so on. And while Joe was drawing that, our target person was at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory Westgate in building A. And that is nearly the correct shape. It's got the right number of floors in it. It's called building A, which is amazing. There's a road. I flew over the site with my camera and took this picture to flatter this data, so don't get too crazy about it. But there is a lab complex, and if you follow this line out off the picture, you see a big round thing, BRTs. And this big round thing is an in-joke. This is a Quonset hut just off the picture here. City out here, Livermore's out that way, parking lot, parking lot. At 4 p.m. in the afternoon, our fellow was driving out to site A300, which is the middle of the Altamont wind windmill farm. And this is all Joe drew at this session. And he says, moving electricity in the form of grid, single power poles, halo probably not visible to the naked eye. And I took this picture to flatter that data, and obviously you've seen it. I didn't need to. Finally, the main target was the accelerator. And he didn't do a good job on this. In the formal analysis, we broke this down into the 3 targets, and this was the main one. And he has a kind of a Star Trek scenario. First of all, he's got it as an accelerator, a great big thing about 3 feet in diameter, and he says it's got 10 angstrom radiation, and it's accelerating stuff, and all that's wrong. And in the middle of all this wrong stuff, he says, wait a minute, this is a gadget to accelerate electrons. Then went back to describing wrong stuff. Okay. We're going to try a little experiment tonight. Before we go into the star part of the star, I'm going to show you Joe doing this in real time. We did a series which you may probably have seen. It was aired on ABC National Television in November 1995. It was a production company called LMNO Productions. They put together a really classy series with Joan London called Behind Closed Doors. If you've not seen it, it's an excellent show. The piece that we did for Put to the Test folded fairly soon after this. We're told not because of this. In some sense, it was because of this, because it was so good everything else failed. They spent these people were fabulous. They spent about $150,000 on this 20-minute segment. And I said, hey folks, you got a 15% chance this is going to work. And they still went ahead and did it in accordance with a really very strict protocol. Should we try to shut the lights down, do you think, a little bit for the movie? We've left the videotape. Well, we brought the videotape, but we didn't have anything to play the videotape on. So you have your choice. Yeah, this is the one. Yeah, you have your choice. We can pass the actual videotape around, and you can hold it to your forehead for about 30 seconds. Or I can try to show it to you on the laptop, because it's also on the laptop. But
didn't you say it was SVHS?
It's SVHS, yeah. No. Pardon me? Oh, well, we'll try it. Why isn't it doing that? Oh, it wants me to close this up. Okay. There it is. I'll start it, and we'll extend it to full screen here. And get the cursor out of the way.
Extrasensory perception, ESP. We've all heard of someone who says they have it, and scientists from around the world have spent decades trying to explain it. Well, you're about to meet a man who claims to possess this extraordinary ability.
The most extraordinary ability is get his lips to move differently from his voice.
Joe McMoneagle was a professional soldier. 2 brutal tours in Vietnam. U.S. Army Intelligence, Legion of Merit Award winner. A black and white world, clearly defined and limited to his 5 senses. But in 1970, Joe claims that world was turned inside out. In a restaurant, Joe suddenly fell ill and staggered outside. This is the first time he's told this story on television.
It was sort of a pop, and I found myself standing outside the road watching the rain go through my hands. And looked up and saw my body sort of bent and out of the doorway. I knew at that point that I was probably dead.
Joe was rushed to a hospital, where he arrived, showing no signs of life.
I felt as though I was falling backwards. It was involved that way.
So here you are, you almost died. And then all these strange things start happening to you. What's going through your mind?
It shattered all my concepts of reality. I started having spontaneous out-of-bodies. I'd lay down for a nap on the couch or something, and I just find myself suddenly out of my body, somewhere else, totally.
Joe also claims he started having other unexplainable experiences, like knowing what complete strangers were thinking. For 8 years, he kept his extrasensory perceptions to himself. Unbeknownst to Joe, 3,000 miles across the country.
No, sorry.
We're just beginning to study extrasensory perception, ESP.
When I first got involved with this, I was very scared. I said, if this is real, it's critically important. After 20 years, I've come to the conclusion something interesting is going on.
How do you study ESP in the lab? Well, science has developed an experiment called remote viewing. The person being tested is placed in a closed room. A researcher then goes to an unknown location, and the subject is asked to use ESP to draw what that researcher is seeing. For the past 20 years, Dr. May has conducted thousands of these remote viewing experiments. In 1978, he started testing Joe McMoneagle. Dr. May claims Joe has drawn scores of unknown sights, 50% of the time with remarkable and unexplainable success.
In one of his best hits, we had a person that was in the administration building at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. And all Joe drew was the laboratory. Perfect plain view of what this laboratory looks like. The interesting thing is, Joe's never been to Livermore. And this person could have been hiding anywhere in the entire continent of the USA. We looked in the laboratory to figure out what's special about Joe. Both genetically, logically, physically, behaviorally, every way one can look at a human being. And the good news is, Joe is boringly normal like the rest of us. What we are proposing is that there is a 6th and additional sense that is responsible for what Joe does in the laboratory and in the real world.
Does Joe McMoneagle actually have a 6th sense, a sense which cannot be explained? To test his abilities, we flew him here to Houston, a city to which he's never been. For Joe, it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. The needle, a random location. The haystack, the 5,436 square miles that make up Greater Houston. We hired a movie location scout who spent 5 days finding a wide variety of distinct target sites.
I think all of them have dramatic Houston elements with very defined architectural styles. And, you know, one of the things that I did not want to do is repeat any common denominator. I did not want there to be 2 archways. I didn't want there to be 2 triangles in the visual.
Following Dr. May's scientific protocol, the producers reduced the hundreds of possible sites down to 4. A life-size treehouse on the George Ranch. A visually dramatic portion of the theme park Astro World. The ship channel at the Port of Houston Authority. And a famous local landmark, the water wall. Without Joe's knowledge, those locations were photographed and placed in numbered envelopes at our downtown headquarters. We hired Officer Bill Baker of the Houston Police Department to retain custody of those envelopes. With Joe McMoneagle sequestered in a windowless, soundproof room, we placed the 4 numbered envelopes in an adjacent room. To choose our final location, Julie Wiesen, a local marketing executive, was asked to roll the dice. So the number is 2.
What a wimpy roll.
Why don't you take envelope number 2? For the test, we selected Jessica Miller from the Houston Visitors Bureau to be what the scientists call the target person. Inside envelope number 2 was the photograph of the Houston ship channel. It would be Jessica's job to go to the target site and carefully observe every detail. Theory, through ESP, Joe might actually be able to see the location through Jessica's eyes. We would simultaneously record both Jessica and Joe. So while they drove, Joe began what he calls his cool-down period, similar to meditation, mind of all outside distractions. After 30 minutes, it was time for our test to begin. I had no knowledge of any of the locations.
We have been radioed that our crew and our target person are now in sight. I'm going to show you a picture. This is our target person. Have you ever seen her before?
No, I've never seen it before.
Describe for us the environment that she's in.
For television purposes, we've condensed the 15-minute section. Remember, these These are the 4 locations in the envelopes. But all Joe knows is that the location is anywhere in Greater Houston.
First impression of getting this kind of a, I'm going to call it a river for lack of a better name. My sense is that it's both natural and man-made, so there's probably been something done to this river. It's been dredged or seawalls, formal walls have been put in some kind.
I didn't know it, but within moments, with just a few strokes of his pen, Joe had eliminated not only our 3 other locations, but the infinite number of possible sites around Houston. Now the question became, how detailed could he get?
Any vertical lines, the perpendicular one to the other, but the horizontal lines seem to have curves to them. The actual target itself is more of a drawing.
Remember, at this moment, Joe is attempting to see what Jessica to see.
But she's looking up. So there's something tall at the target. Keeps looking up at it. I want to say there's like a bridge nearby. My sense is the bridge isn't meant for traffic.
As you're going through this process, is this confined just to visual?
Some of it's visual, but some of it's also hearing or smells or taste or just sensations.
Towards the end of Joe's session, a huge cargo ship docked right in the middle of our location, dramatically altering the target site.
I'm just getting a lot of metallic noise. There's something else down here as well. It's a very, very large object. I don't think it's a building. I don't know what that is. But this is a very large object. Something tall behind the part of the entry. Then I get sort of a almost a specifically designed platform. I get a feeling like the black stripe down the center of it or something. This is about probably all I'm going to get on this part.
It was now time to go to the target site. Remember, Joe's impressions included a bridge, a river improved by man, seawalls, a very large object, and lots of metallic noise. When we arrived, we met Jessica, and unbelievably, we saw what she saw. A bridge, a river improved by man, a very large object, and a barge used for dredging. This is scary. Take a look at that. And then take a look at the barge in the water, and the shape of that.
It looks exactly like this.
Were you looking at that during the
I looked at that a lot because I, would move down in that direction, so I did look at it a lot.
What really impresses me is large object. I'm looking at this ship, and I can't believe it, because that's right on the nose. Now, in terms of the bridge, you said you thought it was more foot traffic than an automobile.
That's obviously something that twisted the interpretation. Generally speaking, about 80% of what I do say usually turns out to be correct.
Are you pleased with the way this turned out?
Yeah, I'm pleased. I think out of all the places that we could have been around Houston, this is very much fits the picture of the area.
About 20% of what's okay is as close to spectacular as I can possibly wish. Scientists don't like to use the term miracle very often, but this is as close to one as you can imagine.
Coincidence, chance, or an extrasensory ability that exists in all of us. If you were skeptical, like I was, then perhaps what Joe McGonigal accomplished today opened all of our minds just a bit. Reporting for the Houston Chip Channel, I'm Bill McAstee.
You got their money worth.
Yeah, I think so too.
They got their money's worth.
What's interesting, Joe told me he had dinner with the crew, Bill McAfee, just not too long ago on the East Coast. And it's like 4.5 years after this, and he's still blown by it. That's the only thing he can remember because he was so skeptical about this whole thing. And he had control of it. He himself, as producer, he didn't have control over any of the technical details. But he knew that. So there was just no way that this could be a case of fraud. And so it's still very, very impacting. Now, if you bear with me a moment, and I'll try to get us back to where we were. I do apologize about that video. This is a brand new device graciously loaned to us by my wife Diane. It's hers. And there seems to be a flaw in this unit, which I'm talking to Sony Corporation about, because that should play at not Mickey Mouse speed, but at normal speed. Joe doesn't normally talk that way, but I do. I talk like this all the time. Okay, so bear with me a second while I try to get us back to this position without too much pain. So just let me scoot through these. There's a short way to do that. Okay, here we go. All right, I promised the stars. If you have a spot, a little bit of astronomy first. If you have a spot on the Earth, it's a globe, it takes two numbers to locate where you are, right? Longitude and latitude. We're at about 37.5 degrees north latitude here and about 122 degrees west longitude. Well, that's a general idea, that if you have a sphere, it always takes two numbers to locate where you are on that surface of that sphere, and astronomers have the same problem. The sphere they're working with is the so-called celestial sphere. That's the sphere in which you think all those, what you think are stars, are actually little white dots on this enormous bubble around the Earth. That's what the ancients thought for a long time.
They were right.
And they're right, actually, yes. And I'll prove that to you in a moment. But so again, you have to have sort of the equivalent of longitude and latitude. And what the astronomers use, they use two words. One called declination, which is the angle above the celestial equator. That's equivalent to latitude. And what we call longitude on the Earth, they call right ascension. Instead of measuring it in degrees, minutes, and seconds, they happen to measure it in hours, minutes, and seconds. And so if you want to point your telescope at Sirius, the star, you get a book and you look down the book and you say Sirius. It'll tell you those two numbers, the declination and the right ascension. You dial those into your telescope, and back in the old days when astronomers used to do this, you'd look through the telescope, voila, there it is. Okay, so the definition of what is called local sidereal time is nothing more than, at any given instant along the north-south meridian, the right ascension values that are right of those stars that are right overhead. And of course that's moving as the Earth rotates and as it goes around the sun. It's a fairly complicated relationship. So the local sidereal time, just to refresh your mind, is just simply the right ascension value of the stars that are on the north-south meridian. All of this work, at least for a while, belongs to James Spottiswoode. He's a colleague in our laboratory. He's brilliant on his part. And for years, James has been interested in the relationship between anomalous cognition and the fluctuations of the geomagnetic field. And because some people report a correlation that when there's so much magnetic fluctuations you don't do as well, and at other times you do much better. And so he had collected about 1,500 ESP trials from around 20 years worth of data in the northern latitudes, Europe and the US, and he found virtually no effect at all with the geomagnetic field. So, well, he said the next step would be, well, if we're looking geomagnetically, which is a solar system phenomenon, the geomagnetic field comes because the sun is spitting out particles at us, for the most part. Why not think a next scale bigger? Let's get out of this particular solar system and talk about the star system in general. Not astrology, but the star system in the galaxy as the next step away from our particular solar system. That was his motivation. So he called me up one day. He lives down in LA. He says, Ed, please don't laugh. I know that's a clue. And I said, okay, what do you got? He says, well, I've been looking at the quality of the extrasensory perception of the remote viewing as a function of the local sidereal time. And I see this huge peak at 13 hours local sidereal time. And I immediately broke into hysterical laughter and tears, saying, look, you want me to sell ESP and astrology? No hope. I can't do this. We got to make this go away. So he and I worked together for about 6 months, examining all possible ways in which this could be an artifact. Even invented some ways it probably couldn't have been an artifact. We desperately wanted this to go away. We looked at, well, maybe there's one laboratory that gets this and no other labs. No, it's in everybody's lab's data. There's probably 30 laboratories worth of data in here. And what this data is along this axis is the quality of the remote viewing on a trial-by-trial basis versus the local sidereal time, or the right ascension value of the stars that were directly overhead when the trial took place. That's what you're looking at there. And this is an average of all the data. And this is a peak. This is 4 standard deviations above the mean. You don't see that kind of data in behavioral psychology or in any behavioral science that I'm aware of, except physiological sciences. You can get peaks like that. That's a physics peak. It's a big, fat peak, and you can't miss it. And there's a big, fat hole, which you can't miss right there. And that big, fat hole right here is really important. It says there's probably a few hundred trials right in that little hole, that for 20 years, hundreds of trials with good, bad, and indifferent psychics all over the planet in the Northern Hemisphere. There has never been an example on the average of ESP, period. The effect size is 0, no ESP. That's astounding. What in the blazes is going on?
Ed,
Yeah.
is that, I mean, if you were to look at Joe's data, which I assume over time,
Yeah.
you know,
He bombs out here too.
bombs out there too.
Yeah. Not always. I mean, there's quite a bit of spread in here, but this is the error bar associated with it, with this set of data.
He peaks at 13 now.
Yep. So does everybody.
Even Joe, who's pretty good old.
Yep. You'll see examples of this in a minute. So that's the original data, and I said, all right, what we got to do is we got to call up all of our friends all over the planet. The interesting thing about the parapsychological research community is it's extremely tiny. So we called 2 people. No, there's a few more. The problem is we've all slept with each other's spouses and have, you know, it's a real incestuous kind of an organization. So, Gad, should not do that. Thunder.
Mother will get you.
You two sitting in the front row, it's pretty bad. So we said, send us your new data. Send us the data we don't have in here. And by golly, they did. And this is the result. Stupid peak didn't go away. There it is, the red curve. The hole is still here, and there's some other structure. It's not a perfect match, but not bad. Yeah?
That's 6 hours apart.
You betcha. Big clue coming up. About a year ago, and it'll happen again in April, I was up at Stockholm, the psychology department, University of Stockholm. And one of our colleagues up there, Adrian Parker, who's a displaced Brit, now a Swedish citizen, had conducted, how many? 140 Gonsfeld trials, which is a form of remote viewing. Voila. Here's a big peak. We don't know what the heck that is. But this is the farthest north data we have in Sweden, Gothenburg, Sweden. This is hot stuff. Hasn't even been published yet. This is work done at Cornell with 25 trials of meditators. The red curve is the composite we've had so far. The black curve is from the data from the meditators. This straight line means we just don't have any data there. There are a few trials. All I can do is say it happens over and over again. We do not have a single data set with this in which it is not present. So what is going on? Well, since I'm up here and you're down there, I have hand-waving license. So you're about to see furious hand-waving, which is a physics speak for saying we haven't a clue about what is about to follow is true or not, but it makes a good story. Amazingly enough, I think we can see the galaxy, the structure of the Milky Way galaxy in which we are all embedded in this remote viewing data. Let me see if I can convince you of that. One of the things that Joe can do in one of these lucid dream trips where he can go and stand, I asked him to please take a camera, and would he mind not floating up out of the plane of the galaxy in which we're in and take a picture? We need a picture of a galaxy, and he obliged. So there's the Milky Way galaxy, or actually one close like ours. And physics people like to put coordinate systems on stuff. So if you get an idea, this X is kind of an X, and it's in the plane of the galaxy. These galaxies are skinny little things that rotate. This one is anyway. And it's rotating not unlike a hurricane. And this arrow here is like pointing straight up out of the middle of the galaxy. It's called the normal to the galaxy, perpendicular. And there we are, right in there. And let's suppose you do a remote viewing trial at a time that when you walk outside and look in the southern sky along the meridian, your gaze does this, right toward the center of the galaxy. Do you know what constellation that's in, by the way? Sagittarius. Sagittarius. So if you look straight into, if you're going to try to be clever when Sagittarius is on the meridian, don't. Go back to sleep.
Why is that? I missed that.
Why is that? It's because that corresponds to that peak.
I see.
You sag at sag.
When you got it. Exactly.
So it's Sagittarius.
When Sagittarius is up there, the galactic center is right in your face. And over all this period of time, for 20 years and hundreds of trials, we have no evidence on the average that psi happens in the laboratory, at least. We're not done. If you walk outside and your gaze is toward Virgo, the Virgo cluster, it turns out your gaze is vertically out of the plane of the galaxy. I tried to indicate that by that red arrow. You're way ahead of me. Corresponds to that peak.
So you're looking east when you say you're looking?
Along the north-south meridian. We don't have the declination coordinate.
You're looking on the north-south meridian. So
It turns out at 13 hours where this peak is, that is the right ascension value, to be technical, of the vector that points straight out from the normal of the galaxy. Another way of wording that, if you do a remote viewing or try to be clever, when much of the galaxy is below the apparent horizon, you'll do the best. By a factor of 4. 400% improvement. That's what that peak says. And if you walk outside and gaze up,
so it would be north. Well, most of the galaxy is north. It would be below the apparent horizon.
that's right. If you go to the South Pole, you should never be able to do remote viewing ever, because Sagittarius is always staring in your face somewhere.
Do you have any data from Chile?
No, we have almost no data from the Southern Hemisphere. We're trying to raise money to spend lots of time down in the Southern Hemisphere. Typically, Adelaide, Australia is one of my favorite spots. Fiji's got good beach, is a good place to do remote viewing.
Is this published anywhere?
Yes.
Copies of this?
This hand-waving speculation is not. Much of this can be found in the Journal of Scientific Exploration.
And on the internet somewhere?
Yes, it is. James has it on his site, and I have it on mine.
Can you give me the web address?
Yes, I'll do so after.
JSC,
Is
Journal of Scientific Exploration.
Correct. And if you walk outside and gaze up, where your gaze is radially out from the center of the galaxy, I don't know what constellation it is when you do that, it corresponds to that little peak out there. Now, one thing that's not published is we have looked at a couple of interesting things. One is, we've gone and you can log onto the internet and find out for every, say, 15-minute intervals of local sidereal time, in other words, a little stripe right overhead, north-south, you can actually count up. Astronomers do this for a living because they're really bored and underfunded. They count out how many stars there are in that little strip. And then they wait 15 minutes and do it again, wait 15 minutes and do it again. And what you end up, when you're all done with this over a 24-hour period, is what's called the galactic stellar mass density. All right? So when Sagittarius is up there, there are lots of stars there, so you get a great big peak with the stellar mass density. And when Sagittarius is below the horizon and the Milky Way in a dark night is below the horizon too, you have a minimum in stellar mass density. So when you plot the stellar mass density, or its inverse, it virtually overlays that curve. That's astounding. If you then say, well, what is it? What could possibly be doing this? I'll let you in a little secret. It is the mothership is parked at 13 hours right ascension. Whitney Stryber will have a lot to say about that in the next talk. If you look at, you get on the internet, you can count and find out how much electromagnetic radiation is coming from stripes of local sidereal time across the sky. I mean, it's amazing the amount of stuff you can find on the internet. And you could look at that as a function of the frequency of the electromagnetic radiation. And we've looked at two because they're very common. One is 408 megahertz, which is the radio astronomy frequency they use a lot. And then there's a very characteristic radio emission line of molecular hydrogen called the 21 centimeter line of hydrogen. And with a free parameter and even more hand waving than I've discussed, the amount of radiation overlays that curve. What this suggests is something even weirder than ESP. That is, humans' ability, probably more ability than just simple extrasensory perception, is modulated to some degree, and in an ESP case to a rather substantial degree, a 400% change, by a weak, an incredibly weak radio signal from the galaxy. It is so weak, in fact, that I generate more radio waves by rubbing my shirt, just that, than you get from the galaxy. An untuned car drives by in the street with it sparking, more radiation. There is tons more radiation from all human sources and natural sources. A lightning bolt goes off in Argentina. We get more radiation from that than you get from the galaxy. How in the world can we be sensitive to that?
What radiation peak is that?
Pardon me?
What frequency is that you're referring to?
For what? It's just a convenient frequency radio astronomers use. They build telescopes which are sensitive to
You
that.
said there was a particular frequency that is facilitating things.
Well, no, we found no frequency dependence here. We're still looking at this. Is hot off the press. We're looking at it because we have to have a 60 degrees cone where this thing works, so it sounds like the atmosphere is absorbing. We're trying to hone in on what this frequency could be, and there's not enough data in shielded environments to really know about what's going on. But we speculate that if ESP is modulated by this, so should other human behaviors. And I have one tentative example. It may come, and this is from the work from Jan Dahlquist at the psychology department at University of Stockholm. He said, you know, it may not come to surprise to any of you that if you have a series of automobile accidents in Sweden, that 100% of them, bar none, involve an automobile. What may be a surprise to you is that 50% of them involve a large furry animal. When you think about it, they tell me they have more elk in Sweden than they have people. And so, you know, you're driving along in the middle of the long winter night and you smack into a poor elk or a reindeer on the road. Happens a lot. And when you take into account driving patterns, because at rush hour there's more cars on the road and all that kind of stuff, when you handle all that carefully, you end up with a substantial phenomenon at 13 hours local sidereal time, a significant minimum of automobile accidents with large furry animals. What the hell does that mean? I have not one clue. I'm not even sure it's real, but it's interesting. So we're all on a search, James and I and a number of other colleagues, of looking at other forms of behavior.
It means the elks are psychic and know not to be in the road.
That's it. You got it. Or maybe the humans are psychic and know how to avoid them. We're looking at other forms of human behavior to see that, or searching for ways of getting into large databases. My bet is that would happen. Now, one other thing to make a note that I have not said, and that is that biological systems, particularly in humans and other creatures, I suppose, are very dose sensitive. It is not as good America's Dr. Dean Adele will regale you with on talk radio, if a little bit works, more's a lot better. No. There are huge dose-dependent effects where that as you start lowering the dose, it gets better, the efficacy. So just because this is an extremely weak source of electromagnetic radiation, if that's what this turns out to actually be, it may not be a surprise, since we have been bathed by this ever since we scampered down from the trees. It would not necessarily be a surprise that we would be somehow evolutionarily sensitive to it.
Maybe some other force not measured yet?
It could, there are all kinds of stuff that's not measured yet that could be. I agree. Yes, sir?
Is that related in some way to feeding cycles and things like that, in relation to the sun and the moon? It's been documented by some people.
This,
sun and moon.
this data, no. This is...
No, but I mean the same possible kind of mechanism, because apparently there is a very strong correlation between juxtapositions of angles of the sun and the moon and when animals will feed. For example, fishing is always best
Right.
at certain points. I just wondered if it was some kind of similar possible mechanism.
It could well be. We have not looked at that, and one of the reasons we haven't is, in some sense, we've made an error that scientists frequently will make, compartmentalization. We say, well, the sun and the moon, this is stellar. The sun and the moon is not involved in that. So we haven't looked at it, but that's a great idea, and we'll definitely look at that, because we have access to some biologists who would be happy to help us with those feeding cycles to have a look at it. Thank you for the suggestion. Yes, sir?
When is the 13-hour sidereal time line up with noon? What season will it be in?
Line up with what?
With noon.
Noon?
Local solar.
Local time.
You know, I mean, they're trying to get it lined.
Yeah, at September 21st, local sidereal time and clock time are in phase with each other. So at 1 p.m. on September 21st, that's the time to be psychic. But don't do it at 6 in the evening. Now, it slips about 3 minutes and 55 seconds per day. So right now, it's about 3:30 in the morning to be good. Yeah.
So, what you just said bears on my question, which is, does precession with equinoxes and so forth. So right now, the galactic center is more or less very close to where the winter solstice is, whereas that wouldn't be the case, let's say, 6,000 some odd years from now, it would rotate a quarter of the
It could well be, yeah.
So I don't mean to throw in perhaps a totally unmeasurable thing, is how you can do research for 6,000 years hence or in the past, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, that's a very good question, and we've tried to broach a little bit. My colleagues and I, actually, Laura Faith or Larissa Velenskaya, and I put forward a proposal to the BIOL folks in Portugal, and they didn't fund this project, but it addresses that slightly. You know, obviously we can't go back 6,000 years. But the one thing that shamans were really good at, are really good at, is observers of their internal experiences. So I thought, well, you know, without having to address a very difficult question, namely, in shamanistic rituals all over the world, to what degree are they psychic or not? That's a hard question I don't even want to address. That's very hard. No one's actually done a good job, in my view, of that. But there's another thing that you can do which begs that question. You just sidestep it entirely. That is, let us look at the timing that these rituals over hundreds of years. And shamans will say, well, you know, I've learned, do we get LST creep? You know, you start off with that, well, if I do it a little earlier, oh yeah, that's better. Oh, this is really a great time to do it. And it might take hundreds of years to see that. Would you see some of these rituals clumping around those times? Now, clearly, you know, they didn't have astronomy gadgets, but they say, well, the third moon in September after, you know, whatever their measuring apparatus was, you could then convert that into local sidereal time. The BL folks chose not to fund that, but it's still an interesting project. My wife and her colleagues are doing research in Kerala, South India, and she tells me that they divide up the day into 2-hour segments of auspiciousness, right? Yeah. And so we're gonna, she's going back in a month, so we're going to try to look at there, at least in little 2-hour chunks, since it's a freebie, to see whether there's any LST creep. Yep.
When you said they've divided the day into 2-hour sections of auspiciousness, who is they?
The astrologers in Kerala, certain groups of astrologers.
Well, you know, of course, there are 12 signs in the zodiac, so it would be like, you know, it would correlate with that. Well, I should say 12 constellations in that zodiac. But they also use 24-minute periods, muhurtas.
Right.
So why the 2-hour section as opposed to the muhurta, which is the traditional?
Ed just made up 2 hours. I just said that they're in small segments.
I thought, okay.
24 minutes.
She's the expert. I'm making it up as I go along.
So what segments are being used, if I can ask?
I'm not an expert on Malayali astrology, so I was just going to go to an astrologer when I'm there. Every person that we talk to has calendars, you know, in their homes that say, you know, that are broken up and say,
Yeah.
you know, this is a good time to start, this one isn't, and so forth. So
Yeah.
just see how LSD works with that.
It's very
Ruth?
familiar. And Taoism too, they have 2-hour segments, how the chi flows through the body.
Huh. See, there's a great deal of research here to do, and I'd love to get Larissa together with you sometime to have a look at this. Yeah, I know. This is fascinating work, and it's one of those areas where there is a chance to merge a difficult area of research, namely field research and the more interesting human aspects of things, into some pretty high-tech stuff at the same time. So I think we're on the verge, and this, again, I want to emphasize, this is James Spottiswood's brilliant insight. A lot of people have now contributed to that, but he's the main player in this game. Yes?
Am I to assume that, in spite of looking at this effect, if you try to look at sunspot activity, you got no lineup? Is that correct?
Sunspot. Well,
the strength of that signal is magnitude is bigger than the signal.
let me show you one more slide now in the formal talk, and then I'll show you an additional slide that'll answer that question for you. You know, our work at SRI for years has been involved in application work. I mean, we weren't doing research, we were spying on the Russians. So what I was more interested in, what else could you do with this? I mean, you know, there's a whole realm of stuff. You can search for kidnap victims, you can do healing, who knows? Tons of great stuff. Well, physics people are more interested in this kind of future application. The theoretical physicist with powers of ESP is stealing a thought experiment from a colleague. Now, I'll come back and try to answer your question by showing a slide that I hadn't really thought of being part of the whole presentation, but it may take me a moment to find it, so bear with me just a moment. There's the little sucker. Okay. We solved a mystery, and that's extremely rare in ESP research, to actually solve a mystery. This represents something like 1,500 remote viewing trials scattered over 20 years. And as I said earlier, James has been the person tracking, along with Persinger and others, the correlation with the geomagnetic field fluctuations. Just to remind you what those are, if you have a compass and it points north, but if you were to examine it really carefully, it's actually wiggling a little bit. Very slowly and very little, but it does wiggle. And that wiggles because of activity in the sun mostly. And you know, sometimes people would report a really strong relationship, a correlation between the quality of the ESP on the one hand and the geomagnetic field fluctuations. The more fluctuations, the worse the ESP. The quieter the Earth's magnetic field was fluctuating, the better the ESP. It's a negative correlation. And one person, Marilyn Schlitz, currently the director of research at Noetics, had published a study involving 10 or so trials where she reported a correlation between the quality of her ESP work and the geomagnetic field fluctuation at the time the ESP was taken for each trial was something like a negative correlation of about -0.3. No one else got that. We said, Marilyn, what kind of magic are you doing here? This is ridiculous. You've probably made a mistake because the average correlation over 1,500 trials, 0 is expected by chance. This is tiny. The blue line here represents the average correlation is -0.029, which is virtually zero, non-existent. But James got the clever idea as let's plot for each hour of local sidereal time, there are a certain number of trials that were taken in that period of time. Let's see what that correlation for just those trials are with the geomagnetic field fluctuations. Then we'll do it for the next hour of local sidereal time, and so on. And this is what you see. That at 13 hours, which is the magic time, there is this huge peak, negative, going down. Here it is, all the way down to about 0.35. Turns out all of Marilyn Schlitz's 10 trials were done fortuitously at 13 hours local sidereal time, and she saw this huge correlation no one else was able to see, and now we know why. Why that's the case, what it suggests is, it's extremely bizarre, what it suggests is that humans somehow, on the one hand, are more sensitive in their remote viewing ability when as much as possible of the galaxy is below the apparent horizon. And at the same time, they become sensitized, whereas in other cases they're not sensitive at all, to the magnetic fluctuations of the Earth's field. I mean, it says that generally speaking, you're not sensitive to the Earth's magnetic field fluctuations. That's what this blue line says over here in terms of your ESP ability, and perhaps other stuff too, okay? However, when you really are sensitive to doing as good a remote viewing as you possibly can at 13 hours local sidereal time, you are also at the same time much more sensitive to the Earth's magnetic field. And if there's a lot of magnetic field, it'll wipe out your phenomenon. If there's a little magnetic field fluctuations, you'll do gangbusters, really good. That is a physiological clue, perhaps, and perhaps even a physics clue. And that's where we are. I mean, it's exciting. It's exciting to me. Lloyd is much more knowledgeable on the history of stuff than I am in this world. But I'll tell you, in my knowledge, there is just no, in our field, no examples of not only one, but two totally different physical variables, not psychological ones, physical ones that correlate to these huge degrees with extrasensory perception. And I don't have time to go into it, but we have a third one called the gradient of Shannon entropy.
Shouldn't have said anything.
I'll talk to you during the break. Talk to you during the break. That's a whole nother hour.
It's on the website.
Yeah. But the key feature is, over the last 4 years or 3.5 years, the field in general, because it's not just us, but the field in general has made, in fact, dramatic improvements over associating extrasensory perception with, in our case, 3 separate physical variables. The work that Radin and Bierman and others are doing are showing non-cognitive responses in what he calls presentiment, that the body is beginning to demonstrate very clearly now that it responds in the autonomic nervous system to future events. You don't have to tell anybody, you just sit there like a lump on a log and look at pictures. So we're on the verge, I think, of physiological discoveries and physics discoveries. When we understand what's going on here, we're going to understand a lot. Yeah.
Are you also saying, or maybe you just said it explicitly, that when the plane of the galaxy is below where the observer is...
You can't see it.
Yeah, you can't see it. That's when we're most sensitive, right?
You bet.
Geophysically. And should that follow? I mean, it seems to me that it shouldn't follow.
No.
In terms of traditional physics.
Shouldn't follow in non-traditional physics either. Because the fact is, you can't see the stars, and the geomagnetic field has nothing to do with the stars except one, the sun. So there's no relationship.
Sure about it?
Yes, sir. We've looked at extensively. People have been measuring the geomagnetic field for 130 some odd years. There is simply no relationship between the position of the... See, there's nothing fancy about this LST stuff. All that is just a bunch of numbers of the coordinates of the stars that are overhead. And it may be that they are also emitting weak electromagnetic radiation. Now, there is one thing, that is that this correlation here, is that real? A colleague of ours challenged us, who's a solar physicist from Stanford, and he said, look, this is nonsense. If you think you have something real here, we all know in the geophysics community that the geomagnetic field fluctuations is strongly correlated with twice the solar main rotation frequency. You may know that the sun is spinning. It actually has many different rotation speeds, but there's a main one. And it's well known, says he, that you should see the twice the solar rotation frequency in your ESP data if, in fact, this is a real correlation. We say, oh, that's a great idea. So we worked together and figured out a way to compute what's called the power spectrum analysis of the ESP data. Guess what? A peak at twice the solar rotation frequency. That's nothing new. It just says this correlation is real. Yes, ma'am.
Has anyone had a chance to look at the LST and RNG data, REG data, and peak data to see if there's a same?
No, we have the folks at the Ryan Research Center who are going back in the archives. They're looking at all the ESP card guessing data. The RNG data, I think, has such a small effect size to begin with. We're working here with effect sizes that are 1,000 times larger than the RNG data, so I'd be suspicious of it. But it's worth looking at. We don't have no money and no resources, so we're trying to do the best we can with it.
And we should probably take a break.
Okay, one more question, then we'll take a break.
It's at 13, but it looks like it goes sort of from 11 to 14.
Yeah, it's about a 2-hour wide peak.
So it's sort of from about 11 to 14.
Yeah.
So it's more like an hour and a half?
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
2 hours, or...
I'm getting messages from the back of the room.
What's your website address?
Website address. Well, we're going to take a break and we can go on for a while if you want. The website address is www. It's really boring, let me tell you, because it was state of the art 3 years ago and now it's ancient history, and I haven't modified it since. It's www. L as in Larry, F as in Frank, R as in research, .org. Okay, let's take a break. Thank you. Questions, comments, tomatoes, anything you'd like to throw at me? Judy.
So I understand it, you're saying that the geomagnetic forces are aroused by the sun, and that they have a negative influence on psychic capacity.
Mm-hmm.
What about volcanic activity?
I don't know if you heard that. She's asking, since geomagnetic fields screw up ESP, what about volcanic activity? I have no idea. We've not looked at that. The problem with that is, I would guess, I mean, we can do 3 or 4 ESP experiments per day, and unless you're in Hawaii, there are not very much volcanic activity to do the correlation with. So technically, it might be difficult, but it's worth looking at. My prediction would be, yeah, because these big eruptions and lightning bolts produce these kinds of disturbances that may be indistinguishable, particularly if they're weak.
I wonder if you could do it by month, say, if there's been an eruption.
Well, you can include earthquakes in that also.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which happen more frequently.
Well, some of you may know of the, are any of you aware of the EGG project that's being run out of Princeton and elsewhere around the world, the EGG project? What they're doing is they have random number generators all over the planet. And what they're trying to see, following along the work of Radin and Bierman, that Radin published in his book, that his random generator, to use a technical term, went nuts when the Simpson verdict was announced, as opposed to when the Simpson verdict was not announced. This makes no sense to me whatsoever, but hey, that's what the data says.
What random number generator?
The one that, actually 2 that Dean had, one in his office and one in his home in Nevada. It had highly significant deviations at the very 6-second moment when the Simpson verdict was announced.
How does it correlate to Monica Lewinsky?
Don't know.
I'm not sure I understand.
Is that sucking sound we, no, that's.
The computer was just going along generating random numbers during the day.
Right.
Suddenly it's
You got it.
generating a whole bunch of extra random numbers.
That's right, precisely.
I think Princess Diane's death was the same effect.
Yeah, there are now a number of events. And so the most recent one, which is actually that we're looking into, and I'm not part of this project. I'm a huge skeptic about this. But what the claim is that just this last year at New Year's, the moment New Year 1999 swept the planet, you know, as the New Year's moved around the planet. There's now random generators all over the planet. They're looking for and finding some significant deviations, even in the middle of the Pacific, when somehow this magic fictitious moment called 12 midnight, January 1999, January 1, happens, causes these things to be different. Now, we're looking at some other things. Colleague of mine, I'll just leave it at here because it's very preliminary. We haven't done the analysis yet. We're looking at, we've isolated 375, to use a term that Stephen Schwartz likes to use from time to time, numinous events. How those were chosen, that's a whole other story. We're probably going to report some of this at the PA this year. And from 1952 onward. And we're going to be looking at a natural source of randomness as a function of averaging these 375 events together. Because what doesn't make any sense to me about this at all, and I understand that the data is there and I don't deny that data, but number one, there's no evidence at all that ESP is a function of how far you're away from the target system. We've done experiments all the way out to the moons of Jupiter. Doesn't matter, okay? So why would something, especially in cultures that don't even celebrate our New Year's, they have a different calendar altogether. So what is Western world sociology have anything at all to do with this? Why should a bunch of people, most of whom on this planet have never heard of O.J. Simpson and don't give a darn what happens on this verdict, why should that be? In my view, the answer is it isn't what's going on. I think there's another possible explanation, and let me say at the outset this could be completely wrong, but it needs to be looked at. That is that decisions are made. I'm going to look at the O.J. Simpson trial. Why am I going to look at the O.J. Simpson trial instead of the Super Bowl? Instead of Aunt Martha's 50th birthday? Instead of a million women in Kerala lighting fires all at once? Instead of. How do you choose which events you're going to look at? And when you start counting, are avenues where you can use your own psi ability to make those somewhat wise decisions to get the desired outcome. I'm willing to take bets here and now that's what's going on here. Nothing else makes sense, given the enormous amount of laboratory data that we all have. So when I say it doesn't make sense, that's not a statement that it tweaks my view of reality. It says that it doesn't fit enormous amounts of data that's already there. But you can't deny that data. Something interesting is going on. Yeah.
Two questions. First of all, are those random event generators Y2K compliant?
He asked if
Y2K compliant.
Yeah, they're Y2K compliant. Yes, they will all stop mysteriously at 12 midnight.
Second question is talking about the plane of the galaxy, the center of the galaxy being below the horizon. You're talking about Antarctica where you would not be psychic.
That's right.
Down there. And yet there's enormous amounts of anecdotal data around the Australian Aborigines.
Needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
I was half joking, but half not joking. We have in fact, we have no data from the Southern Hemisphere. And what's interesting is there's a very clear prediction. If you go to Adelaide, that's almost the sort of latitudinal inverse of where we are here in San Francisco. Now, geometry tells you that big peak, which is the 13 hours, it's got to be at 1 hour. Boy, talk about a prediction. Let's go down and do some remote viewing there. Very important to do. And so far, I've been not successful at selling it, although, does anybody have a hat we could probably pass around? You have a hat. Can I borrow your hat?
What's the guy teaching?
Robin Taylor, but he's not done experiments down there. There have been some in South America, but the quality has been so few and so far between, it's been not very good. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
This is a little aside, but it was more along some of the sleep study things that were done a number of years ago. People that had to live underground for a certain period of time so that you could gauge their own cycles without having any idea.
Goes to 24 hours, yeah.
Has there been any correlation to something like that?
Well, what's fun about a group like this is that in the space of about 10 minutes, we can develop a $20 million research program. Because, and I don't mean to be sort of flippant about it, I'm really serious. Yeah. There are just tons, if that's real, and I think it is, what that says about the physiology and about our reaction to this. And it also says some stuff that might not be nice to look at. Can I be politically incorrect for a minute? The realm of possibility, and let me say to defend myself here before I get killed, is that there is any multivariable problem, of which one I'm about to describe to you is multivariable to the max. But it could be that if that peak, if your radiation if you've been bombarded by that radiation since we've climbed down from the trees, whether you're in Aborigines in Australia or Eskimos in the north part of the country or the world or in the northern latitudes of Europe, what if elements of creativity are in fact modulated by that? That would suggest something not very pretty. That peoples in the southern latitudes, and more so as you get farther in the more southern latitudes, may be susceptible to this radiation more than people in the northern latitudes who are hidden from it for longer periods of time. Now, I don't believe that's the case. The reason I don't believe that is in fact the case is because there are all kinds of other overwhelming issues about needs and inventiveness because of survival issues and so on and so on, and sociologists and anthropologists have looked about this for years. But it doesn't mean that perhaps if there is a creativity sense, maybe you should be, to do something creative, be an artist, do it at 13 hours, no matter where you are on the planet.
And
Yep.
what if you talk about people who have lived their
Yeah.
What's to say that they wouldn't have adapted to increase
Absolutely.
sensitivity to whatever it is needs?
Yeah.
Relative to somebody who lives as an Eskimo. I mean, you might find they have actually more, just like different levels of melanin, that have different levels of
Culturally, the Aboriginal, talking to anthropologists who dealt with them, the Aborigines had a need to develop certain amounts of telepathic or other types of communication based on their...
I think that's highly likely.
Some other spots are different.
Because they have, you see, if you are in the northern latitudes where you have physical adversity because of in the creativity spawn, perhaps here you have LST adversity and you adapt by other forms of creativity. Absolutely, no question about that. So it's a very complex, interesting thing. It's a tricky thing, obviously, to look at. It would be hard to quantify in this multivariable circumstance. Yes, sir.
You did this relative to north-south. Did you do anything relative to east-west?
No, because north-south's the definition of local sidereal time. Because that's the star path, that's the right ascension value of that. East-west, another way to rephrase your question, have we looked at it as a function of declination, which doesn't matter, that is east-west lines. And we have not, because all of the data has happened in a very narrow band of celestial latitude declination.
What is that band?
Well, the most far north data we have is about 55 degrees north in Göteborg, Sweden, down to about Texas, which I don't remember what they are. ESP, contrary to all known and stories about it, actually does happen in Texas occasionally.
Well, Joe did in Texas.
Right.
You have to bring people from outside of Texas to
That's.
Yeah, Helmut was very good at shocking his cockroaches.
But the cockroaches weren't from Texas. That's the.
But he was.
That's right. No, he was from Germany.
He was there when it was happening.
Right. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So the third time, in terms of local severe time, that people were not psychic at all. Was that one of the things you were saying?
Yeah. That's it. Well.
So even if you get a Joe McFarnell up there, he wouldn't have.
Flame out.
19 hours, and was there another thing at 6 hours earlier?
Yeah, slightly enhanced at 6 hours. At 6 hours LST, 12 to 13 hours, it's the best. And if you do the geometry, 6 hours corresponds to 90 degrees. So when you're at this, rotating 90 degrees left and rotating 90 degrees right, puts you looking into the galaxy or out from the, radially in or radially out or or vertically. Those are why the 6 hours. That's why you asked the right question at 6 hours.
Slightly enhanced.
Yeah.
Well, I should say 7 hours, because the 7 hours would be 13 minus 6.
Yeah, but 13 I would take somewhat with a grain of salt. But it turns out that the galaxy is I mean, those peaks are wide and noisy, so it's hard to tell exactly. They're roughly 6 hours apart. But that's why I said hand waving about the structure of the galaxy. Yes, sir.
Is there a website where you can get the sidereal time?
Mm-hmm.
There's a number of shareware programs which are very inexpensive, like $7.50 or $10.
Yeah.
That you can get, and
But can you just go on the internet?
Yeah, the National Navy Observatory Center will tell you what it is.
Right, and there's also links if you just do a search for local sidereal time. It's interesting, and most of them are in astronomy sites.
Yeah.
A lot of them have nice little programs. Some even have websites that will do it, but there's some nice little programs both for Windows 3.1 and 95, 98.
You
which
just
can-
download
You can,
the
you download this little program and you can size it, you can put in your location, and it'll calculate.
And just put your LST clock right there on your desktop.
It's nice. Good idea. Very inexpensive.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I guess following that data, back in when you were involved with it, when the military was very involved in the remote viewing, I would think that they would be fascinated by this data because anything that comes up on these lines, the military is like looking, oh, military application. So I would think they would look at this data and think, first of all, at certain times when their remote viewers would want to operate them.
Are you good at writing proposals? Do you want to come over to my place?
And the other thing is they could choose attack times that would be, when the enemy might be less aware or something.
Well, I have a little story about that. First of all, the LST discovery by Spottiswoode occurred after, as far as I know, the military got out of the game. However, back when they hadn't, a friend of mine, actually, a colonel in the Air Force, was then head of the Air Force Office of Scientific Research, the organization which is in charge of all scientific research funded and interested by the Air Force, AFOSR. And he said, Ed, I can't fund an ESP program. Can you give me something I can fund? I really like what you're doing. I'd like to fund you. So, okay. So we were looking at the geomagnetic field. Now, the Air Force has a database at Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio of behavioral data on all Air Force personnel dating from 1947 to the present, which means if they're pilots, pilot performance data, gunnery data, IQ tests, reaction time, you name it. It is an enormous database. And so I put in a proposal to Air Force Office of Scientific Research, and said, for lousy $75,000, what I'd like you to do is to, with these, we identified, 10 or 15 variables we're interested in, with exactly that argument. Said, look, if we can show you that you are 5% less accurate or less capable of flying your airplane at high geomagnetic field times, wouldn't that be interesting to know if you're about to launch a big mission? And I said, what we want to do is no ESP, no nothing. All we want to do is to have someone serve as an interface between us and this humongous database, give us these behavioral data, and we'll do the calculations, and that's the end of it. They sent it to their behavioral people at AFOSR, who thought it was a marvelous program. They didn't fund it, and they didn't fund it for interesting reasons. A lot of our colleagues in the field get paranoid, and eventually, occasionally I do myself, saying, well, you know, everybody hates us, and they didn't fund it because they're afraid of ESP, and you know, blah, blah, blah. But all of these folks have a difficult problem. They have a finite amount of money, and 5 times as many interesting projects that can be possibly funded by that amount of money. And they said, should we put $75,000 into this very interesting project? Or should we put that $75,000 as an add-on to AIDS research for Air Force personnel? No brainer. I'd make the same decision. So in a lot of cases where they would be interested in this, there just is not enough money in that pot. That's what it comes down to. Well, in this game, you can always say, well, you know, no matter what I answer to that question, you can always answer yes, but, and get one more layer deep in the conspiracy. Yeah. My feeling is they are not, and I can tell you why I think that's the case. Even though it's nice to say, and people write books about it, and you can get a lot of TV mileage out of it, and little talk mileage out of it, and say, oh, the government did this and that. That's not, the government didn't do anything. What happened was the personal interests of a very few selected people who were in positions of power who thought this was important to do. And as far as I know, those folks are not around anymore. And they are the true heroes. And someday, when we ever get around to writing our book, you'll learn about some of these people. They are truly heroes. About LSD? No, it'd be a neat idea to look at. Although, you know what's happened? A lot of people have done things like, there was a huge project, where was it, in Michigan or someplace like that? They looked at lottery.
Yeah, I think it was Michigan or Wisconsin.
Yeah, and the problem with that, and Steve Schwartz did an interesting project and published it in Omni once. When you have these kinds of deals, there is such an enormous non-psychic component to these things that even if there is some psychic part, it's riding along and a bunch of other stuff. Give you, excuse me, an example, slightly afield. I spent a lot of time in Russia since 1982. And there's a formerly classified place called Novosibirsk, and there's a community out there at Novosibirsk in Siberia which is devoted to research, and it's now open. And I had an opportunity to be there for some time. And the head of the medical division, the Siberian branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences, the head of the medical division is a fellow by the name of Kazachev. Very interesting fellow. And imagine a building 100 meters long, 7 stories tall, and no electricity on it, actually, much of it. In fact, when he's showing me around his place, literally there were minions running ahead, turning on the lights as this little bubble of lights would go down the hall. It's not funny. It's a very serious problem there, which, you know, that's a whole other political question. He introduced me to one of his colleagues who did probably more remote viewing trials than anybody on the planet, 300,000 of them. And what he did was, he had 77 symbols, each one different, that could be drawn by kind of a 286 machine, okay, little stick symbols. A little chart of all 77 of them. And he passed this chart of 77 symbols out to literally about 1,000 remote viewers all over the former Soviet Union. And they did 300 trials like this. And the way they would do it, leaving aside stacking effect, what he would do is they would come up to do this trial, and everybody else all over Russia knew about this, and he would randomly generate one of those symbols and sit down and stare at it. And meanwhile, all over Russia, people are staring in their minds and filling out and guessing which one of these symbols is the right answer. And he showed me just overwhelmingly strong events, huge statistical significance. For those of you who know what I'm about to say, z-scores of 20 and larger, 20 standard deviation effects, enormous, with a wrong assumption. And the wrong assumption was, oh, but by the way, in each one of these trials, not only did they have the ESP data, they had how many of these 1,000 people had their beds along ley lines pointing north, how many of them stood on one hand with their ears like, I mean, they had tons of data like that, enormous computers for them, full of data, and all of it bogus, because they had made an assumption that each symbol was equally likely to be guessed. And I spent 2 days fighting with the Russian Academy of Sciences Medical Division statistician. And he said, no, it's equally. I said, no, it isn't. You have something called response bias. No, no, no. We argued. And so I noticed, fortunately, that one of the symbols was the swastika. I said, let's look at this. Out of the 300,000 trials, let's find out how many people guessed swastika when it wasn't, in fact, the target. Something like 16. And this poor fellow, to this day I feel badly, you just watch the blood drain from his face as he had this realization that, you know, the assumption of equal guessing for each of these symbols is just simply not right. That people avoid certain symbols and love certain other symbols. So because of this response bias, to tease out a little bit of side that may be riding in this is almost a worthless adventure. So I said to him, kindly, you know, literally 100 meters over there, there's another 7-story building 100 meters long called the Russian Academy of Sciences Division of Statistics. So I said something which I later found from my friend Larissa was a very naive thing for me to say. Did you go consult with them? Oh no, we would never do that. So I said, well, there's a way to recoup all this data. And the way to recoup all this data is, well, you can get kind of a guessing pattern by looking at how many people guessed which symbol when it wasn't the right target, and then compared the real answers to that. Nothing in the data.
Why do you think that's so different than from your data, which was very, very strong?
Which?
Where you did remote viewing and you had very good responses.
Well, for a couple things. First of all, ours was an open set, what's called free response remote viewing. Theirs was closed set. That's the biggest problem. Secondly, they have another problem, which I didn't even address, called the stacking effect, which is this response bias. Okay, well, looks like we're essentially done. One more question, perhaps. Pussycats, all of you. Thank you. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.